Hello. On today's podcast, we're going to discuss the problems with Social Security long term. People keep talking about Social Security like it's going to suddenly disappear one day. That's probably not what happens. The more realistic option is that the system reaches a point where the money coming in simply isn't enough to keep paying everyone what they're currently scheduled to receive. According to the latest 2026 trustees' projections, the retirement trust fund is expected to run out of reserves in late 2032. At that point, Social Security doesn't go to zero. Payroll taxes are still coming in, but those revenues would only cover about 78% of the scheduled retirement and survivor benefits. And over the long term, that percentage is projected to fall even further. So the basic issue is pretty simple. Without some kind of change, benefits get cut automatically because the system can't legally pay money it doesn't have, or whether that situation is raising payroll taxes or finding another source of revenue, reducing benefits gradually, or completely restructuring the program, something's gonna give. And that's what's really the uncomfortable part about this conversation. You can ignore how to save Social Security, but doing nothing isn't a solution. Without more money coming in or changes to what goes out, the people depending on those checks are eventually facing a major benefit cut. And here's where the conversation gets more interesting because raising the payroll tax isn't the only possible answer. It's probably the simple answer administratively, but that doesn't necessarily make it the best one. You could raise the taxable income cap, gradually change benefits for future retirees, adjust the retirement age, or combine some of those changes, which they've already done, raising it from what was it, 62 to 67 for main benefits. The real solution probably has to be a combination because the system's problem is fundamentally that its costs have exceeded its total income since 2021 and are projected to continue doing so under current law. Another option would be to think what the trust fund itself is allowed to do with its reserves. Right now, Social Security trusts and its fund assets are invested in special treasury securities rather than private stocks. So here's the argument for a major restructuring. Instead of treating every dollar in the reserve as money that has to sit entirely in government debt, Congress could potentially create a separately managed investment reserve that puts a limited portion, I'm talking no more than 10, maybe 15%, of its assets into the long term broad stock market index, such as the SP 500. And the important distinction is that I wouldn't make Social Security depend purely on the SP 500 because that would create a different problem. Retirees need predictable checks, and while the stock market can lose enormous values during a recession, but you could build a system where payroll taxes continue to fund the current benefits while creating a long term reserve fund that invests gradually into diversified indexes. That reserve would be there to generate additional income reserves over decades, and like say 3 decades, it doubles or triples its value, as where the current amount just floats at maybe 2-3% a year if you're lucky. And it forces the entire program to lie almost exclusively on taxes from the next generation of workers, which, if you don't have the workers coming in and you're not going to use migrant labor to replace it, it doesn't really give you a good answer, does it? And if you want to take that argument even further, there's an interesting political question around the SP 500 itself. The largest companies, especially the so called Magnificent Seven, are deeply tied to the American economy and benefit from everything from publicly funded infrastructure and research to government contracts and the broader legal and financial system that allow corporations to operate. But I would be careful about saying the government simply props up those seven companies directly. That's too broad. A more defensible argument is that the America's largest corporations operate within and often benefit from a publicly supported economic system. So a possible restructuring model would be this: create a permanent Social Security investment reserve managed independently with strict rules and invest primarily in a broad index. rather than trying to gamble on individual companies, even though we seem to be buying companies anyways, like Intel from Trump's deal. The SP 500 would naturally give the fund exposure to the largest American companies, including the Magnificent Seven, without making Social Security dependent on picking winners and losers. The fund could be built slowly, and its investment gains could become an additional revenue source alongside payroll taxes. But either way, you're going to have to increase one of the other to start creating a surplus again to ensure that this problem doesn't happen again. Clinton was able to do it, but at the same time, you can't just purely invest in debt and make that debt then pay out retirees who then basically keel over later. That's not a responsible business model. Or it doesn't even make sense for its own structure. Anyways, you know, once it's depleted in late 2032, if Congress does nothing combined with its funds and they only pay about 83% out, the investment returns aren't also guaranteed, and putting money in stocks is, if you put money into stocks, it means accepting market risk. But that's the realistic answer. It's probably not to increase tax increases and versus investment reform. It's a combination. You got to broaden the revenue base, make targeted adjustments to benefits when necessary, potentially raise or eliminate some of the taxable wage gap, and carefully design a long term investment reserve. The goal shouldn't be to gamble retirees' checks on the stock market. The goal should be to stop relying on one source of income alone and give Social Security another engine capable of growing over time. Whether that's stock or even real estate, which has always done perfectly fine, you could create government subsidy houses that are purely owned by the government. And yeah, is it something similar to what the Soviet Union did and failed? Yes. But the thing is, you got to find another source of revenue, whatever it may be. And time is kind of ticking because it may not seem like a long time, but there's only 10 years to solve it. And I don't think any of the goofballs in office are even thinking about a solution to this problem. Anyways, this has been the Ruin Leon podcast. We'll see you next time.